Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her friends spent their teenage years worrying about makeup and boys, Sarah was obsessed with military history and physical fitness. She would wake up at 5 in the morning to run 5 miles before school, spent her weekends at the local shooting range, and could recite every major military operation from World War II to the present day. Growing up in a small town in Colorado, Sarah felt trapped by the expectations placed on young women. Her mother wanted her to focus on finding a nice husband and settling down, while her father, a retired Army sergeant, encouraged her military interests, but never quite believed his daughter could handle the real thing. Sarah knew better. She had something burning inside her that demanded more than a quiet suburban life. When Sarah turned 18, she made a decision that would change her life forever. Against her parents' wishes, she enlisted in the Navy. Her father was proud but worried, while her mother cried for 3 days straight. Sarah didn't care about their concerns. She had a mission, and nothing would stop her from achieving it. Basic training was everything Sarah had imagined and more. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands, Sarah excelled. Her drill instructors noticed her exceptional performance immediately. She could outrun most of the male recruits. Her marksmanship scores were in the top 5%, and her leadership abilities were obvious to everyone around her. During her second week of training, Sarah learned about the Navy SEALs. She had heard of them before, of course. But seeing actual SEAL instructors conduct a demonstration on base filled her with a burning desire she had never experienced before. These were the elite of the elite, the warriors who took on the most dangerous missions in the world. Sarah knew immediately that this was her calling. There was just one problem. Women were not allowed in the SEALs. The policy was clear and had been in place for decades. Sarah's heart sank when she learned this, but she refused to give up on her dream. She began researching everything she could about the SEALs, studying their tactics, their history, and their training methods. She convinced herself that if she could prove herself worthy, maybe the rules would change. After completing basic training with honors, Sarah was assigned to a naval base in California. She threw herself into her work with incredible intensity, volunteering for every difficult assignment and pushing herself to excel in every area. Her commanding officers were impressed by her dedication and skill, but Sarah felt like she was wasting her potential in regular Navy duties. During her off-duty hours, Sarah began training with a group of former Special Operations soldiers who ran a private gym near the base. These men had served in various elite units, including the SEALs, Delta Force, and Army Rangers. They were initially skeptical of the young woman who showed up asking to train with them, but Sarah quickly proved herself worthy of their respect. The training was brutal. Sarah would finish her regular Navy duties and then spend 3 hours every evening pushing her body and mind to their limits. She learned advanced combat techniques, studied foreign languages, and practiced with weapons that most soldiers never got to touch. The former operators treated her like one of their own, and Sarah felt like she had finally found her tribe. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Sarah was approached by a man named Marcus Chen. Marcus was a former SEAL who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq before retiring due to a back injury. He had been watching Sarah train for weeks and was impressed by her abilities. "You're as good as any SEAL I've served with," Marcus told her. "Maybe better than most." Sarah's heart raced at the compliment. "I wish I could prove that officially," she said. Marcus looked around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "There might be a way," he said quietly. "But it would be dangerous, and it would require you to take some serious risks." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Tell me." Marcus explained that he still had contacts within the Special Operations community. There were unofficial training exercises and competitions that took place away from the official military structure. These events allowed elite soldiers from different units to test their skills against each other in realistic scenarios. If Sarah could prove herself in these competitions, word would get around, and eventually, the right people would notice. But you'd have to present yourself as someone with SEAL training, Marcus warned. If you got caught, it would mean the end of your military career and probably prison time for impersonating a member of an elite unit. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about Marcus's proposal. She knew the risks were enormous, but she also knew that this might be her only chance to prove that she belonged with the elite. Her entire life had been building toward this moment, and she couldn't let fear stop her now. Finally, Sarah made her decision. She would do whatever it took to prove herself worthy of the SEALs, even if it meant breaking the rules. She began working with Marcus to create a believable backstory and to prepare for the underground competitions that would test every skill she had developed. Sarah knew she was crossing a line that she could never uncross. Once she started down this path, there would be no going back. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not just a young woman with dreams, but a warrior ready to fight for her place in the world. The transformation had already begun, and Sarah Martinez was ready to become someone else entirely. The first competition was scheduled for the following month at a remote location in Nevada. Sarah would have to request leave from her regular duties and travel there under a false identity. She spent every free moment preparing, pushing her body harder than ever before, and studying every detail of SEAL operations and culture. As the date approached, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror, unlike anything she had ever experienced. She was about to attempt something that could destroy her life, but she was also closer than ever to achieving her ultimate goal. The line between courage and foolishness had never been thinner, but Sarah had already decided which side she would choose. The competition in Nevada was everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Hidden away in a desert compound that looked like something out of a spy movie, elite soldiers from various special operations units gathered to test their skills in realistic combat scenarios. Sarah arrived using the identity Marcus had helped her create, complete with forged documents that showed her as a recently discharged SEAL named Alex Rodriguez. The other competitors were impressive and intimidating. Sarah found herself surrounded by men who had seen real combat in the world's most dangerous places. They carried themselves with a confidence that came from surviving impossible situations, and Sarah wondered if she could really fool them into thinking she belonged among their ranks. The first challenge was a timed obstacle course that would test speed, strength, and problem-solving abilities. Sarah watched as the other competitors tackled the course with practiced efficiency, their movements fluid and precise. When her turn came, Sarah channeled every hour of training she had endured over the past months. She attacked the course with a ferocity that surprised even herself. Her body moved like a machine, each obstacle conquered with technical precision and raw determination. When she crossed the finish line, the timer showed a result that placed her in the top 3 among all competitors. The other soldiers looked at her with new respect, and Sarah felt a rush of validation unlike anything she had ever experienced. The challenges continued over the next 3 days. Sarah faced marksmanship tests, tactical scenarios, survival challenges, and psychological evaluations. Each event pushed her to her limits, but she performed consistently well, often outperforming soldiers with years of actual combat experience. On the final day of the competition, Sarah was approached by a man who introduced himself only as Colonel Richards. He was clearly someone important, though he wore no visible rank or unit insignia. Richards had been watching Sarah throughout the competition, and he was impressed by what he had seen. "I don't recognize you from any of the teams," Richards said. "Which SEAL unit did you serve with?" Sarah's heart pounded, but she stuck to the story she and Marcus had prepared. "Team 3, sir. Recently discharged after a training injury." Richards nodded thoughtfully. "I know most of the guys from Team 3. What was your swim buddy's name during Bud Yes?" Sarah had prepared for questions like this, but the specific details Richards was asking for were beyond what she had memorized. She made up a name and hoped he wouldn't press further, but she could see suspicion growing in his eyes. Despite her growing anxiety about Richards' questions, Sarah finished the competition strong. She placed second overall, an achievement that would have been remarkable for any soldier, let alone someone who had never actually served in special operations. As the competitors prepared to leave, several of them approached Sarah to exchange contact information and discuss future opportunities. It was then that Sarah made a mistake that would change everything. Feeling confident after her strong performance, she agreed to meet some of the other competitors at a bar in Las Vegas to celebrate. She should have maintained her cover and left immediately, but the adrenaline and sense of belonging she felt were intoxicating. At the bar, the conversation flowed as freely as the alcohol. The soldiers shared war stories and discussed their experiences in various units. Sarah found herself swept up in the camaraderie, sharing her own fabricated stories with increasing confidence. She felt like she had finally found her tribe, and for a few hours she allowed herself to believe that her deception was complete. The trouble started when one of the soldiers, a former SEAL named Tony Garrett, began asking specific questions about people and places that Sarah should have known if her story were true. Tony had served with Team 3 during the time Sarah claimed to have been there, and he couldn't remember anyone matching her description. "I'm having trouble placing you," Tony said, his voice friendly but his eyes sharp. "Who was your platoon chief when you were with the team?" Sarah's mind raced as she tried to come up with a convincing answer, but she could see that Tony was already suspicious. Other conversations at the table had stopped, and she realized that several of the other soldiers were now paying attention to her responses. "Maybe we didn't overlap," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The teams were pretty compartmentalized back then." Tony's expression hardened. "Not that compartmentalized," he said. "And I've got a pretty good memory for faces." The situation deteriorated rapidly from there. Tony began making phone calls to contacts who would be able to verify Sarah's story. Within an hour, he had confirmed that no one matching Sarah's description had ever served with SEAL Team 3 during the time period she claimed. Sarah realized her deception was crumbling and tried to leave, but Tony and several other soldiers blocked her path. They weren't violent, but they made it clear that she wouldn't be going anywhere until they got some answers. "Who are you, really?" Tony demanded. "And what the hell are you trying to pull here?" Sarah considered trying to maintain her cover story, but she could see that it was hopeless. These men were professionals who knew how to spot deception, and they weren't going to let her walk away without the truth. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said finally. "I'm active duty Navy, but I've never been a SEAL." The revelation sent shockwaves through the group. Several of the soldiers began shouting questions at once, demanding to know how she had gotten access to the competition and what her real motives were. Sarah tried to explain her dream of joining the SEALs and her frustration with the restrictions that prevented women from serving in elite units, but the soldiers weren't interested in her explanations. Tony pulled out his phone and made another call, this time to military police. Within 30 minutes, Sarah found herself in handcuffs, facing charges of impersonating a member of the United States Navy SEALs, fraud, and several other serious offenses. As she sat in the back of a police car, watching the lights of Las Vegas fade in the distance, Sarah realized that her dream of serving with the elite had turned into a nightmare that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. Her military career was over before it had really begun, and she would likely face prison time for her deception. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had proven herself capable of performing at the same level as actual SEALs, but instead of recognition, she was facing prosecution. As the car headed toward the military police station, Sarah wondered if her quest to prove herself worthy had been worth the price she was about to pay. The investigation that followed was thorough and humiliating. Military investigators went through every detail of Sarah's deception, interviewing everyone who had been involved and building a case that seemed designed to make an example of her. The media picked up the story, turning Sarah into a symbol of everything from feminist overreach to military discipline, depending on which outlet was covering the story. Sarah's parents were devastated. Her father, despite his military background, couldn't understand how his daughter had gotten involved in such a serious deception. Her mother was embarrassed by the attention and worried about Sarah's future. The young woman who had once dreamed of serving her country with honor now faced the possibility of spending years in prison for pursuing that dream in the wrong way. The military courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, and military personnel who had come to witness what many expected to be a straightforward case of impersonation and fraud. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, wearing her dress blue uniform with the ribbons and decorations she had earned during her legitimate Navy service. Despite everything that had happened, she still looked every inch the professional sailor she had trained to become. The prosecution's case was methodical and damaging. They called witness after witness who testified about Sarah's elaborate deception, the forged documents she had used, and the way she had fooled experienced special operations veterans into believing she was one of them. The prosecutors painted a picture of a young woman so desperate for recognition that she was willing to steal the honor that belonged to those who had actually earned it through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Sarah's military-appointed defense attorney did his best to present mitigating circumstances. He talked about Sarah's exemplary record during her legitimate Navy service, her physical capabilities that had impressed even hardened special operations veterans, and her genuine desire to serve her country at the highest level. But even he seemed to understand that the facts of the case made a conviction almost inevitable. The most damaging testimony came from Tony Garrett, the former SEAL who had exposed Sarah's deception in Las Vegas. Tony described how Sarah had not only lied about her service, but had also participated in classified discussions about tactics and operations. In his opinion, her actions represented a serious breach of security that could have endangered real SEALs still serving overseas. "She didn't just pretend to be one of us for fun," Tony testified. "She gained access to information and networks that could have been used to harm actual operators. We trusted her because we thought she had earned that trust through the same hell we all went through." As the prosecution rested their case, Sarah felt the weight of the courtroom's disapproval pressing down on her. She had become a symbol of deception and stolen valor, and it seemed like nothing could change the narrative that had formed around her actions. Then something unexpected happened. As the court prepared to break for lunch, a commotion erupted near the back of the courtroom. A group of high-ranking military officers had entered, led by a man whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Admiral James Harrison was a living legend in the special operations community, a former SEAL himself who had gone on to command some of the Navy's most elite units. Admiral Harrison approached the defense table and asked to speak with Sarah privately. The judge agreed to a brief recess, and Sarah found herself in a small conference room with one of the most decorated officers in the United States Navy. "I've been following your case," Admiral Harrison said, his voice calm but intense. "I wanted to meet you before the sentencing." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She had expected another lecture about honor and the sacred traditions of the SEALs, but Admiral Harrison's tone suggested something different. "May I see your arm?" the Admiral asked suddenly. Sarah was confused by the request, but she rolled up the sleeve of her dress blue jacket. On her forearm was a tattoo that she had gotten during her first year in the Navy. It was a simple design, an anchor surrounded by the words, "Courage, Honor, Commitment," in elegant script. Admiral Harrison studied the tattoo for a long moment, then looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "Where did you get this done?" "At a shop in Norfolk, sir, right after I finished basic training." The Admiral nodded slowly. "I know that shop. I know the artist who did this work. His name is Miguel Santos, and he only does tattoos for military personnel. But that's not why this tattoo is special. Sarah waited, not understanding what the Admiral was getting at. Miguel Santos is a former SEAL, Admiral Harrison continued. He lost his leg in Afghanistan and opened that tattoo shop when he got out. But Miguel has a very specific policy. He only does this particular design with these exact words in this exact style for people he believes truly embody the values of the SEALs, regardless of whether they've actually served in the teams. Sarah's heart began to race as she realized what the Admiral was saying. Miguel called me 3 years ago to tell me about a young woman who had impressed him so much that he broke his own rules. He said she was active-duty Navy, training harder than anyone he had ever seen, and that she had something special inside her. He told me he had given her the tattoo and that someday I should meet her. The Admiral paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Miguel Santos has given that tattoo to exactly 7 people in 10 years of running his shop. 6 of them went on to successfully complete SEAL training and serve with distinction. You're the 7th. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she forced herself to maintain composure. Sir, I don't understand what this means for my case. Admiral Harrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the base. It means that maybe you went about things the wrong way, but you weren't wrong about who you are inside. It also means that the military needs to take a hard look at policies that prevent talented people from serving where they can do the most good. When court resumed, Admiral Harrison asked permission to address the judge directly. What followed was a testimony unlike anything anyone in the courtroom had ever witnessed. The Admiral spoke about the changing nature of warfare and the need for the military to evolve with the times. He talked about Sarah's performance in the competitions, which had been documented by several of the participants, and compared her scores to those of actual SEAL candidates during their training. Your Honor, Admiral Harrison said, this young woman's methods were wrong, but her capabilities are undeniable. She performed at a level that would put her in the top 10% of SEAL candidates, and she did it without the benefit of the world's most advanced military training. The Admiral went on to reveal that Sarah's case had sparked discussions at the highest levels of the Pentagon about changing the policies that excluded women from special operations units. While those changes would take years to implement, Sarah's actions had already begun to shift the conversation in ways that could benefit future generations of female service members. I'm not asking you to excuse her actions, Admiral Harrison concluded, but I am asking you to consider that sometimes it takes someone willing to break unjust rules to show us why those rules need to change. The judge recessed the court for 2 hours to consider the Admiral's unexpected testimony. When court resumed, he delivered a sentence that surprised everyone present. Sarah was found guilty of the charges against her, but instead of prison time, she was sentenced to 2 years of supervised probation and reduction in rank. More importantly, she would be allowed to remain in the Navy and would be transferred to a special unit that was being formed to test the integration of women into roles previously closed to them. The defendant's actions were wrong and cannot be excused, the judge said. But they have also opened our eyes to capabilities and potential that we might otherwise have overlooked. This court believes that the interests of justice and the needs of our military are best served by giving Ms. Martinez an opportunity to serve her country in a way that utilizes her proven abilities. As Sarah stood to hear the verdict, she felt a complex mixture of relief, gratitude, and determination. She had paid a price for her deception, but she had also proven her point in ways she never could have imagined. The tattoo on her arm, which had seemed like a simple symbol of her commitment to military values, had turned out to be a key that opened doors she didn't even know existed. 3 months later, Sarah found herself at a classified training facility, working alongside a small group of female service members who were participating in an experimental program to evaluate women's capabilities in special operations roles. The training was everything she had dreamed of and more, pushing her to limits she hadn't known existed. Admiral Harrison visited the facility regularly, checking on the progress of what the participants had begun calling the Pioneer Program. During one of these visits, he pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "You know that tattoo artist I mentioned?" he said. "Miguel Santos has been following your story. He wanted me to give you this." The Admiral handed Sarah a small package. Inside was a new tattoo design, one that incorporated elements of the seal trident with symbols representing the pioneering work she was now doing. Attached was a note from Miguel. "For proving that courage sometimes means choosing the hard path, even when it's the wrong path. Make us proud." Sarah looked at the design and smiled. She had learned that sometimes the most important victories come from defeats, and that proving yourself worthy isn't always about following the rules. Sometimes it's about being brave enough to show others that the rules themselves need to change. The young woman who had once been arrested for impersonating a SEAL was now helping to write the playbook for the first generation of female special operations warriors. Her journey had been unconventional and painful, but it had led her exactly where she belonged. As she watched her fellow pioneers tackle challenges that had once been reserved for men only, Sarah knew that her sacrifice had been worth it. The tattoo on her arm served as a daily reminder that courage, honor, and commitment weren't defined by gender or traditional expectations, but by the willingness to fight for what you believe in, no matter the cost.